from a smoking ruin.
He brought his family to the Mosquito Coast, planning to build them a paradise.
Tell him he is a dangerous man, and one of these days he's going to get you all killed.
But something happened that wasn't part of the plan.
Oh my God! You've always been against me.
Harrison Ford in his most remarkable performance, The Mosquito Coast, rated PG.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pantheon Plus. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. Welcome to another edition of Pantheon Plus. We are here tonight to discuss Harrison Ford. We are continuing Harrison Ford month. This week we are discussing 1986's The Mosquito Coast. We will not be discussing the Apple TV television series that ran for 2 seasons, The Mosquito Coast. Our focus is on the 1986 movie directed by Peter Weir. You can make sure to find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, leave a 4 or 5 star review. So let's tell people discover the great work that we are doing here at Pantheon Plus, as well as the rest of the Real World Podcasting Network, which includes Matt and Ben as they are exploring the Transformers franchise, which is very interesting. Kevin Ford and I exploring movies or I should say shows that have been canceled too soon, plus the final season of Barry. That podcast should be posted now as we speak. So make sure you go ahead and listen to that. Of course, my co-host for this week and every week is Brian at Brian to Brain on Twitter for now. And Brian, last week we discussed the first of 2 Peter Weir Harrison Ford joints. The first one was Witness, which we both liked, thought it was very successful, got Harrison Ford an Oscar nomination. The Mosquito Coast is one of the poorest performing Harrison Ford movies at this point as we speak, in terms of losing money and not being as well regarded, but I think this is a movie that, as we watch it in 2023, I think we can have a real appreciation for what it's doing, for who Harrison Ford is as a character. I think this is a movie that is aged extremely well. I think we'll get into some of the flaws of the ending in a little bit, but I have to say, Brian, that overall, from the texture of the jungle to the performances of Harrison Ford and River Phoenix, this was kind of a surprise for me, and a pleasant one at that.
Most definitely, and following up last week's episode, I kind of forgot that Peter Weir directed The Truman Show, which is probably his best, and I kind of mentioned some other works of his, but I totally forgot he did Truman Show. So how could I? That's a classic within itself. We can talk about another time, but I found this movie to be very fascinating, and you're totally right. It kind of came out of left field, and it was a kind of a surprise because, like I mentioned before, I had seen the VHS cover and the DVD cover all my life, practically at the video store, seeing Harrison Ford's face on it with the long hair, and just not knowing anything about it, and just kind of being like, "What is this movie?" It's just looking back now, it's just so fascinating because like they shot it like practically on location and practical sets, and everything was real, no CGI, and they're out there in the middle of the jungle living in a family unit and just building and inventing, and everything's practical, and everything looks like everything was built by a genius, which this movie is kind of about, a genius that kind of takes his family off and lives in the jungle because he's done with America in 1986. He's just done with it. And he's kind of racist, but he doesn't want to admit it. But we can talk about that in a bit. But very fascinating. It's kind of like a Steve Jobs before Steve Jobs, kind of that kind of type. That's kind of how I feel about it. And then all of a sudden Steve Jobs comes out, with that Steve Jobs public look in the 90s. I don't know. I feel like this movie may have influenced him a little bit. I don't know. In terms of his creativity and inventing skills and being, ahead of the curve in terms of technology and stuff like that. And, the character here, Allie, played by Harrison Ford. Very similar, very, very similar. So I don't know. I felt like I was watching a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, which is a good sign sometimes. And I don't know. I've never felt this directing presence by Peter Weir before in any of his movies, and this is the first time I've felt like he was kind of going for that auteurism. You know what I mean? But he almost got there, but it kind of fell flat by the end. And to me, Paul Thomas Anderson, when you watch his movies, is one of those auteurs, so to speak, where you just watch his movies and you know it's him. And this kind of almost had that feel to it, and it kind of fell flat. But still, just a tremendous watch, great performances. River Phoenix, man, Jesus Christ, he's a hell of an actor, man. And looking back, is still a tough loss to read about and remember. And yeah, I mean, if you watch his intensity in this performance, you kind of see somewhere where the deep pain is, and probably led to that drug use and the heavy drug use in the leading to his death. So a lot going on with his performance, but overall, I think this is a fascinating movie that kind of falls flat, and I feel like Helen Mirren got shafted.
Yeah, we could get into the Helen Mirren of it all shortly, but I think even though this is Harrison Ford month, I think River Phoenix is a good place to start. So for those who don't know, unfortunately, we're at about the 30-year anniversary of the passing of River Phoenix, and it was because of drugs. And if you look at his career, if you look at kind of the movies that he did before his untimely death, you look at Mosquito Coast, you look at Indiana Jones, you look at Stand By Me, you look at My Own Private Idaho. I'm sure that I'm forgetting things, but River Phoenix was well on his way to having the type of career that I would say would be something akin to what Leonardo DiCaprio has done. Like that is the closest comparison that I can come to, even though River Phoenix is a little bit on the older side. But it's pretty amazing to think that, Joaquin Phoenix, as good as he is, River Phoenix is kind of the one who is the talented one. And that is just so remarkable. So I think one of the reasons that we feel the intensity of his performance here is he was raised in a cult. He was in the Children of God cult. His family had been stationed in Venezuela, so you've got that connection as well. One of his motivations to act in this movie is because he recognized the similarities between it and his childhood, and I mean, you really feel it. You feel that authenticity, you feel that intensity throughout. He and Harrison Ford had a very close bond, and Ford personally recommended Phoenix for the part of young Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade. And of course, that is such an important part of his career, River Phoenix, I should say. And Ford stated that of all the young actors who were working at the time, River was the one who looked the most like him when he was that age. And I think it really works out. And River Phoenix was about 15 years old. He was a little bit old for the role of Charlie Fox at this time. They were having trouble finding an age appropriate. I mean, this is a tough performance. You can't plug somebody off of like Disney or Nickelodeon or like a kid show. Like this is a lot. And I can see where they would have trouble finding kids for these roles, because especially the Charlie role is so important, because he is not only a key performer, but he is also a narrator as well. So this is tough. This was just very, very tough. And I think it's good that they just threw it away and just said this is the best person for the job, because he and Harrison Ford are able to play off each other extremely well here. And Harrison Ford considers this to be his favorite movie, and I think that says a lot. I'm not sure if this is my favorite of his, but I think it would definitely be considered underrated. And I think that just getting Harrison Ford and River Phoenix playing off of each other, that's why this movie works consistently for its 1 hour and 58-minute runtime.
Totally agree. And I've always said this every time we mentioned River Phoenix, but he is by far my favorite part of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And when I found out that he was in, because I didn't know he was in this movie until like we were scheduled to watch it. You know what I mean? So when I found that connection, I was like, that's absolutely perfect for the casting. So I was excited for the casting, and of course it delivered, no doubt about it. And something about their chemistry together, I guess it's that he sees a little bit of himself in River Phoenix, but man, what could have been, you know what I mean? Because how different could the Indiana Jones franchise could have been if River Phoenix decided to take the mantle, like towards the late 90s, crying out loud, how different things would have been. But that's, the multiverse for you, and it's a different universe, and that's going on probably in a different universe. And we got River Phoenix as, like, the young Indiana Jones in a different universe. So that's kind of what I always thought about, you know what I mean? So the multiverse is real, I guess, so to speak, but who knows? But yeah, that's I always think about that. And yeah, just this, I just can't believe how, I don't know, just the opening scene, and then I'm watching Harrison Ford, and I feel like this is the most completely different thing he's ever done, like up to this point. And I've seen so many of his movies, and you think, oh, I haven't even seen that many Harrison Ford movies. When you count them off, it's like with all the Indiana Jones movies and the Star Wars movies alone, plus all these other movies we've been talking about, plus Air Force One, plus The Fugitive. You know what I mean? In comparison to all those roles, this is by far the most different, and totally worthy of an Oscar. And we're gonna go on that rant. I guess that's gonna be a recurring gag on these Harrison Ford podcasts of where the Oscars got it wrong, so to speak, because there are some people that you could easily take out, nominate Harrison Ford for this one because he totally deserved it. But I don't know, politics maybe. I don't, just the way that this movie's set up. It's kind of, I don't know. I mean, it's very anti-American, so to speak, in a way. But do they resolve that issue at the end?
I mean, I think it's a very complicated movie because I would say that it is kind of anti-capitalist in some ways, but is Ali Fox the antagonist of the movie? Is he the protagonist of the movie? I think that's part of the issue, but I think that part of the reason that this movie did not do very well is because you have a lead character just coming out and being so anti-capitalist. And in Ronald Reagan's America, I'm not sure that this would have worked out. Again, this is the kind of movie, and I could see why they turned this into an Apple TV show, because I think a lot of what Ali Fox is saying, even if he does kind of go over the deep end, I think that a lot of this resonates much more in this decade as opposed to 1986. And I think that just speaks to the quality of the source material. This is, of course, based off of a novel by Paul Theroux. And I could definitely see the themes and a lot of what's being done here. It just plays off really well. And I want to point this out. There's a couple of interesting things I want to point out. So I mentioned that this was based off of a novel. The book's ending is very different, and it was toned down for the movie. And we're going to talk this week and next week about how the ending of the source material is very different from the movie. So in the book, Ali Fox collapses, and he is eaten by vultures. These are creatures that he despises throughout the book. So clearly they were vultures. I mean, it's not very subtle, but I think it works out really well. So Brian, I have two theories on why they didn't do this. Are you ready for this?
I have some guesses, but go on.
So one of them is, Harrison Ford, of course, in Indiana Jones is afraid of snakes. So I think they wanted to get away from that similarity. Vultures are not the same as snakes, but I think the idea of Harrison Ford being afraid of animals. The other thing is Platoon has a very climactic moment with Willem Dafoe, and I wonder if they were concerned about kind of mimicking that. So that's my theory on the ending, why it was toned down for the movie and why he basically dies of gunshot wounds instead.
Well, here's my theory. Did you notice there's hardly any animals in this movie? Like, hardly any, which kind of got me thinking, like, oh, they had to cut back on something. And they cut back on, like, all these wild animals that are probably encroaching on their campsite, probably, most likely. And we just don't see any of that. So I think it's a budget issue, considering what we saw in the middle of the movie with the most gigantic explosion I've ever seen in film, one of them. But I feel like they toned it down. And they said, like, we can't do vultures. It's too much. Let's have less animals, more explosion. That's my theory. Because, look, I mean, I fully expected some kind of animal attack or something in the middle of this movie. I mean, they're in the jungle, right? And nothing. So that's kind of my theory, because I noticed there was hardly any wildlife attacking them in a movie in the middle of a jungle. So there you go.
I think it's a situation where perhaps animals are very expensive. And again, for a movie like this, when you've got Harrison Ford and River Phoenix, and this is kind of a big deal coming off of Witness. I could certainly see that being the case. So I just want to also point out that 36 years later, season 2, episode 6 of the TV adaptation of the Mosquito Coast aired on Apple TV. And during that same week, Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren were reunited in their TV series as they starred together 1923 on Paramount Plus. So some nice synergy there.
So does that mean it's not too late for Sam and Rebecca? I mean, Sam and Diane?
It is too late for that. We are not getting that reunion in Frasier. That's what I'm telling you.
Oh, we're getting some kind of reunion in that one.
Peter Weir had planned to make this movie with Jack Nicholson in the lead role, and because Jack Nicholson did not want to go to Belize and miss his beloved Los Angeles Lakers, especially in 1985 when the Lakers are winning their NBA championship, and that was a big deal. So I can understand not wanting to film while you're missing the Lakers, and that was a huge thing for one Jack Nicholson. So here's my thing: I very much think that if Jack Nicholson is in this movie, like, it basically turns into a Shining sequel, whether they wanted to or not, because that is who Jack Nicholson is. And I feel like Harrison Ford, in a way, is the more appropriate person for this role, because you're not consciously thinking of, okay, this is Jack from The Shining. This is something very different. Harrison Ford is being very different. Again, the comparison that I have come up with is he reminds me a lot of Humphrey Bogart in Treasure of the Sierra Madre, just in terms of the manic, the obsessive, and obviously Harrison Ford, Ali Fox is not chasing literal treasure, but he is chasing kind of this treasure of purity of spirit and purity of just living off the land and generating a utopian society and creating things and basically being a god. That's much more what he is into, but that is the comparison that I came up with.
Yet to watch Treasure of the Sierra Madre, but it's on my classics to watch list, of course. There's only so many movies I can watch every week, folks. But see, I think with the Jack Nicholson thing, I think they were trying to typecast, because at this point, to me, The Shining feels like a spiritual sequel in some ways to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I know that sounds very weird, but if you look at the psychological breakdown of both characters that Jack Nicholson plays in both movies, they go on a very kind of similar journey where by the end of it they're just gone mentally. You know what I mean? It's like that slow breakdown, and one for physical reasons because of the lobotomy in one, but it just built up to that moment in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But to me, it would have been the same thing, and I think at this point, if I were Jack Nicholson, I'd be like, I'm kind of done with this whole going on this journey and playing this sort of crazy, sort of nuts kind of guy with this ambition, and then just kind of totally fizzling out by the end. You know what I mean? That's pretty much what happened to this character, Ali. So I see why Jack Nicholson wouldn't want to do it again, to be honest. And I think that at this point, he would have been too much of a typecast. And yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. And look, I love Jack Nicholson and all, but I would say by the 90s, he starts kind of collecting paychecks, even though he won for As Good as It Gets and got nominated for About Schmidt. But I feel like at this point, he didn't really need this kind of role, and he didn't need to be out there in the jungle. You know what I mean? By this point, he was just kind of chilling, and I get that.
So I think we get another great first act. I'm not sure if it's as good and as perfect, but I know that you definitely noticed Jason Alexander's cameo at the beginning of this. And what I want to specifically point out is that Ali and his son go into the hardware store. And how does Jason Alexander react to seeing these two come in?
Like the most annoyed guy in the world. It's like me working at Blockbuster, and then the most annoying customers come in on the regular, and you're just like, oh, fuck, here we go again. Here we go again. Here comes a stupid question, and here comes some debate that I can't win, and here we go.
You just know that Ali has gone into this hardware store a number of times, ranted and raved. Jason Alexander has heard it all before, and it's wild to me. Like, if I were Jason Alexander, I would be just as annoyed having to hear this guy. And I want to be clear, I think there's some times when he is right, but like the old cliche goes, like even a broken clock is right twice. And I would just get annoyed at a certain point with who this guy is. And Charlie very clearly looks up to his father and has to heed some warnings from Mr. Polsky, an asparagus farm owner, kind of warning Charlie about his dad and who he is. And I think that is the journey of this movie, is Charlie realizing that his father is not the be all end all, that his father is a very flawed individual. And I appreciate the fact that we do get to see that Allie is a great inventor, like legitimately is somebody who, if you channel his energy correctly, could probably do some great things. And I think we see that with his invention of the ice machine, both in the smaller scale when they're in the United States and later on when they're in Geronimo. I mean, you see what he is able to do, and you see the extraordinary genius that is at work. But unfortunately, he is never able to quite control his own instincts and really able to control like his need to just be so pure. And I think you feel that. But I really appreciate the fact that we can actually see that, in fact, despite his flaws, we do see that he is a genius.
He is a genius, but I think he's racist, but he doesn't want to admit it because it does feel like he's trying to do the whole white savior thing to me. And that's, I don't know, that's kind of my perspective on it. That's why I'm kind of like feeling like he's not, I feel like he's an antagonist. Like, I feel like this is kind of an anti-hero movie, to me at least. And I know it's going to feel different to some other people, but especially the way he was in the hardware store and did not want to buy things made by Japanese manufacturers or it's just kind of like, okay, I get it. It's the whole Ford is struggling, and there's about to be the whole crash of the back in Detroit, Roger and Me, that whole documentary, and that's about to happen. So I get why he's so frustrated, but then it kind of leads to this this racist kind of thing going on, and then when he goes to the jungle, he's kind of like this this white savior. So then it kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit, but it kind of plays into the story, what they're trying to tell. And the story is, despite him trying to be so pure, his obsession drives him kind of mad, and to the point where he's even lying to his own family about the destruction of America. And at that point, I texted you, Jerome, and I was like, well, he's gone reverse MAGA now. So it's like, yeah, I mean, he's super, super liberal, and he thinks he's smarter than everyone else. And, that's kind of why I got that Steve Jobs vibe, especially like I could totally see Steve Jobs doing that to someone in the 80s at a hardware store. You know what I mean? Whether it not be just a certain, whether it's not because of, where the manufacturer came from or some kind of little thing like that, where he would have just kind of found something or some kind of flaw to debate the store owner with. And I could totally see Steve Jobs doing that. So that's just kind of my perspective on it. Yeah, it's kind of this different take on an inventor. Like I said, he's a genius. So that's kind of where the fun, like there's some fun elements to this movie. It's those fun elements where he's inventing stuff and you see the development of the town. But yeah, just this, like I said before, he's just on this like, trajectory to just crash and burn. And it's so obvious from the start because he seems like he's just destined to fail because he wants to thrive for perfection, but there is no perfection in terms of society. There's no utopia, so it's like you're doomed to fail off the bat.
Right. At the end of the day, you have to function in a society, whether you like that or not. I mean, that's just the rules that we have established and that we've normed in our society, whether you agree with those or not. Unless you are a mega billionaire who can afford to kind of buy an island and just be by yourself, you kind of have to live within the system. And even billionaires who buy their own islands, like they have to still function within that system. So it's funny you mentioned Steve Jobs. Personality wise, I definitely see it. But I think the biggest difference is that Steve Jobs is pro-capitalist and Ali Fox is, I would say he is anti-capitalist. I would say that he is very much, I think he's trying to think of himself as a god in some ways and kind of even being above the idea of capital. So I think that's mainly what they're going for. And I think you see that with the way that he interacts with Reverend Spellgood and his family, the fact that he is critiquing religion so much and critiquing God. And I think you see that a lot with these megalomaniacs. The fact that many of them are either not religious or not overtly religious, or they go for something more like a Zen kind of thing, more so than Christianity. I think especially with these billionaires, I think you see that quite a bit. So yeah, I definitely see a little bit of that Steve Jobs comparison, but I also see that there is a fundamental difference. So as the Fox family goes down to Central America and Latin America, we kind of see their relationship with the Spellgoods and how different they are from the Spellgoods. The Spellgoods are Christian missionaries, which is very common in these third world parts of these quote unquote undeveloped. And I'm not saying they're undeveloped. I'm saying that that's kind of the perception. I would say leave these people alone, because looking around, I could tell you that developed society is maybe not done the best, and we should just kind of leave people alone. So Allie and his family kind of they buy a town, or he buys a town, and they're kind of building it up, and things are going really well at first, and they build kind of this mechanism for building ice, and they're able to bring ice to people in the area, but Allie thinks that they're kind of taking advantage of him and not quote unquote appreciating him. So they kind of go on this journey, and the ice melts, and then they come back, and it's a little bit unclear to me. I'm not sure if you have any feelings on this or thoughts on this. These group of rebels, I don't know if they're part of a cartel or if they're part of some like communist organization, but they kind of run interference and are clearly setting things up. And that's when he decides to lock them in the giant container that's making the ice. And instead of allowing themselves to be frozen to death, they decide to try to shoot their way out. And this causes what you said is kind of an all-time great explosion. And it is a tremendous explosion. I love the way that the camera focuses on the family, and just some of the shots you get are pretty great. And this is probably, for me, this is the first hour building up to that moment. I think that's when this movie really excels.
Yeah, this is where it kind of really picks up and gets kind of exciting, like where I wasn't expecting it to get exciting, just because, like, wow, this giant explosion just came out of nowhere. The three dudes, I think they're kind of like pirates, dudes on the run, doing whatever. Not necessarily rebels or anyone tied to any groups or organizations or something like that. It just seemed like three dudes who were just outlaws on the run. And, that's, if you're on the run, you go into the jungle, you're going to try to, make friends with the locals. And that's what they did. And then they ended up being Harrison Ford or Allie and the townspeople. And that's how they got there. And of course, they're the only one with guns. So that's this kind of like this Western kind of feel all of a sudden, where it's like everyone's on tense, everyone's tense, and everyone can just kind of like anyone can fire at any time. So yeah, and then the way they got him, there was like, you can sleep here, stay here overnight, and they put him in the thing, and of course they have no idea it's a freaking giant ice chest cooler thing that makes ice, and so he just tried to freeze them to death. And I was like, dude, they are gonna shoot their guns out of that thing. What are you doing? And then they shot, and then little did I know, I was like, oh shit, there's going to be a chemical thing going on. And then at first it was like this little like fire, like small fire at the first level that just boom, like it just expanded immediately, and it didn't explode like right then and there. And then it kind of burned, and then all of a sudden you hear Allie say, oh my God, it's going to explode. And they just start running. Holy shit. Like, to me, this was like, oh my God, like, because it's like a chemical explosion too. It's not like something you would see, like, for instance, example, Police Story 2, they blew up a factory at the end, right? And that was just a normal explosion. This is like a chemical explosion because I don't know. I mean, they mentioned later on that it contaminated the river, and you can see it in one of the shots. And I was like, oh, that is a chemical disaster, and they're just gonna leave. So I was like, okay, they're doing that thing. It's not like white people have come in, taken over a culture, contaminated the water, and left. It's not like that hasn't happened before, right? And then now they're stranded. But I couldn't believe, like, the extent of that explosion. Like it reminded me of the Simpsons episode with Radioactive Man, and how they could get it in one take, and they could only do one take, and I could only imagine like the camera fucked up at that moment, and just imagining like, well, we're gonna have to do another take, and like, how do you do another take? You know what I mean? Like, there's only one take of this. You can only get this done once, and they got it done. You know, credit to them. To be honest, I would have just poisoned the guys. To be honest, yeah. And notice how much we're not talking about Helen Mirren, and the fact that her name is Mother really pissed me off.
Well, that's what he calls her. I don't know if that's her actual name, but other than the moment when they're kind of on the boat and she's screaming and like is clearly just hit a wall with who Allie is. Yeah, this is it's unfortunate because I think you rarely get a Helen Mirren performance in a major movie in the 1980s. It really feels like her career kind of took off with like The Queen, and it feels like it sucks that she has not gotten to do her best work. It's just really unfortunate, I think. And the one good thing I can say is I'm glad that she at least got that one moment, but really a lot of the focus is on the kids, especially the two sons. The twin girls barely get anything to do. I don't know if anything was left on the cutting room floor with them, but it's that is also a little bit unfortunate. But yeah, the boys are talking about how they want their father to die, and given the circumstances, you almost can't blame them for wanting their father to die, because things just get worse and worse. They go downstream. They try to build again, and it starts pouring rain. They're going down the river, and yeah, things are not going well. And some of the conversations that Charlie have with his brother, I think, are very powerful, because I think it just shows the extent to which they have lost both the love and respect of their father. This person that they held in such high esteem and thought is basically a genius. You know, I think we all realize that at some point. We all realize that our parents are not perfect, but in this case specifically, they are realizing it on an extreme level.
Yeah, that thing. Well, we got to set it up, because they started questioning, Allie's leadership, and then of course he hears what they're saying and punishes them. So he puts them on a boat by themselves, trailing the other main boat that they're on. It felt like they were just outcasted, and I was like, what a shitty thing to do as a father. What a shitty thing to do. Like, just because they challenged your ego and your judgment, you know what I mean? And they're right. They were totally right, by the way, because they should not be going upriver. They should be going downriver to the fucking town. But he wants to stay away from the town because I don't know, it's his ego. So I totally sympathize with the kids on that fucking canoe. I wouldn't go as far as to say let's kill our father, but it's something like, we got to do something. Maybe we should just cut the fucking rope and just paddle away from the guy, is what I was thinking. But it wasn't like, I felt like they were building for the younger son to kill Allie. That's what it felt like it was building up to, because you could see like earlier in the movie that he was getting like shitted on by Allie because he already started questioning things, and just because he, was complaining about certain things, all of a sudden, like, he was like the unfavorable son. And I was like, come on, man, how can you do that as a father to your son? So I started like, that's where I realized finally that, okay, Harrison Ford is the antagonist in this movie. And if you notice who's the narrator, it's River Phoenix. So in that case, maybe River Phoenix is the protagonist from that perspective. So, because by the end of the movie, he clearly helps his family live, except, Allie, because he got shot by the priest. But yeah, I think that's kind of where that, especially on that canoe, I kind of figured it out, where I think River Phoenix is the true hero of this movie.
Very much so. And again, the fact that he is the narrator, and we don't get a lot of narration, we just kind of get it in spurts. And that's also something that we'll probably address next week, kind of inconsistent narration and kind of using it as a crutch, I would say. It does signify that perhaps he is the protagonist of the movie, but I'm not sure that it totally works for me. So we come to the end as Charlie and Jerry have grown very resentful of their father, and they come ashore when the family stumbles across Spellgood's compound, and Allie sees barbed wire, muddles that the settlement is a Christian concentration camp. That was pretty funny. The rest of the family is sleeping. Charlie and Jerry sneak over to the Spellgood home. They find out. So one of the things that Allie has said is that the United States has been like nuked and destroyed. And then that's one of the reasons that they can't go home. And again, I think this contributes to the cult-like feeling. But Charlie and Jerry realize that the United States has not, in fact, been destroyed, and that somebody in the Spellgood family, the young teenage daughter of the group, Emily, is going to help them escape. But before they can persuade the mother and sisters to leave, Allie sets the church on fire. So we get more fire, more explosions. Spellgood, of course, is very mad, but he does a very unchristian-like thing, or depending on your point of view at this point, maybe a very Christian-like thing. He shoots Allie, paralyzing him from the neck down, and the family escapes aboard the boat. And the family begins traveling. Allie is basically dying. Allie asks if they're going upstream. She lies to him for the first time because they're going the opposite direction, which is very interesting. And Charlie's narration reports the death of Allie, which is kind of clunky. And I think this contributes to the fact that maybe they didn't have the best ending choice. And with Allie's death, the rest of the family can live their lives freely from now on. And basically, like, they're leaving a cult. Like, that is the impression that you get. So not the best ending. It really feels like the first hour of this movie is very strong. I think it kind of gets weaker in the second half. It's still got its great moments, but it really feels like the climax of this movie is the explosion, and then that everything that comes afterward kind of, it feels a bit anticlimactic at times.
Yeah, so in terms of Allie telling his family that, the United States has been blown up, it's almost as if you find out that the election in 2020 was actually not fixed. Huh? Just saying. When the facts you don't like are presented to you, you just make up new facts, right? Huh? Just saying. But in terms of the ending, yes. What I would have done is add a little more to it. Like, I thought, because they were on this wooden boat at the end, like, I thought the family was just going to burn his body to cremate him and just send him off in the river, and then they're going to go off with Hattie in the town. Like, I would have done that, and I think that would have been a more settling kind of visual, because that way it kind of gives them peace, saying goodbye to their father, the father figure, whatever, her husband, and moving on, and that they're safe. But in this case, you don't really know if they're safe going downriver, because God knows what can happen. Still, they're in the jungle. So it's kind of left open-ended, and I don't like that feeling, because I feel like the family deserves better. But based on the narration, it sounds like everything turns out okay. I just kind of wish we got that visual. Because, plus, I mean, let's face it, the character of Hattie, God bless that man. Because no matter what, he was like, Allie was not listening what he was saying when he was talking about the high tide coming in, and you're going to fucking drown when the water does high tide plus the rain, you're going to fucking drown. And he told him that, and he kind of ignored it, but then he was like kind of sort of prepared for it. But then he snuck in and brought them gas and the motor, the thing for the motor. God bless that man. He was a saint to that family. And like, I don't know, by the end, I felt like they owed him more than they could, you know what I mean? Like they definitely owed him more for their life, that he saved their life practically that night, I think, by giving them the gas and all that stuff. So that's just my take on it. And I felt like he should have been the one that kind of shepherded him in at the end, and you got that final visual with him. But that's just my opinion.
Yes, I'm glad that you mentioned Hattie. I think Hattie is unfortunately pretty underdeveloped. Conrad Roberts is the actor who plays Mr. Hattie, and I think he does a really good job. And I think in a movie like this, with so much of the focus kind of being on this white savior, unfortunately, you don't get a lot of development with Mr. Hattie. But I would agree with you. I think that just some of the reactions that you get from Mr. Hattie and the other characters, I think it's pretty amusing, because I think there are times when they're impressed, and then there's other times when they're like, what in the hell are these white people doing? And I think those are both very, very natural reactions to have. And yeah, I'm pretty amused overall, and I was pretty impressed with his performance, and really, again, with Harrison Ford's performance, and with River Phoenix as well. So yeah, it's fascinating to watch this movie and just put it within the context of kind of all of Harrison Ford's other work, it's a very unique movie. I think you see Harrison Ford like being manic. I think you see him not having a lot of humor. I think some of the stuff that he does is funny, but I don't think he's necessarily playing it for laughs. And I think you see him very intelligent. Like I could see Steven Spielberg watching this movie and thinking this is why he could play Dr. Alan Grant. Like this is the movie where he, I think, brings some of that energy to it. But I think that in terms of like, I don't know if it necessarily comes together totally, but I really appreciate the effort. I really appreciate the thought, because this is a very different movie. This is not the type of movie that I think people were ready for in 1986, and I think that's one of the reasons that it didn't do so well, and that's why I don't even think it got the Oscar nominations that it probably deserved, because I think people just kind of they pun not intended, they missed the boat.
Well, Paul Newman won Best Actor this year for this Oscar year. Color of Money, and I've seen Color of Money, and it's very good, but I don't think it's an Oscar-worthy performance for Paul Newman. I've seen much better from Paul Newman. So, but again, from what the kind of consensus is like, as Jerome would put it, you got the gold watch. This is the cap off your career, the one Oscar you're gonna get, kind of thing. But I felt like Harrison Ford way beyond, far and away better than the performance that Paul Newman gave in The Color of Money. And I would argue that if you compare the two performances now to modern critics, I think they would agree with me. Just because, like you said, this movie clicks now much more than it did in '86. So when you get that feeling, the way we kind of watched it, it feels more relevant now. So I think that's why the performance clicks much more now, compared to like what Paul Newman was doing in '86, when he was just kind of rekindling that magic he had when he was in his youth doing the pool shark gimmick. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. And is it Harrison Ford's best performance? It's the best performance that I've seen out of him. But then I haven't seen like all 100% of his catalog. I've probably seen 65 to 70% based on what I've seen. And I thought he was very strong in like The Fugitive. I thought he's underrated in The Fugitive. We just watched Witness. He was very good in Witness. He got the Oscar nomination. But this is what this is something you would get in a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, like I said. And then this would be like Daniel Day-Lewis, you know what I mean? I can clearly see Daniel Day-Lewis doing this movie now and going into that madness and descent. Or even Paul Dano, actually. Paul Dano would be perfect for the modern Ali Fox, I think. And yeah, it would be the same thing, but I think that's kind of the modern picture you would get, and you would get like a Paul Thomas Anderson to direct it. And overall, I think The Jungle looked amazing. Like, just great stuff, but I wanted more wildlife. But again, the budget, and plus, the whole thing about Harrison Ford and animals, that thing. So I get it, but I wanted more kind of wildlife, because I felt like that was kind of missing from the movie.
Yeah, this might be
Ford performance, I have to
say. I mean, I'm not sure if I've seen all of his catalog, but I feel like I've seen enough of the major works at this point to make that point. And certainly there's a good list of performances that he has had over the years. And I'm really impressed by what I saw here. And I really think he should have won. It's funny because Roger Ebert called this performance boring. And look, I like Roger Ebert a lot, but that is not a good take on his part.
1986, upper class Chicago end kind of guy, right? I mean, he was making a lot of money in '86 for writing and doing syndicated TV. So
I don't know. I mean, he has a lot of good.
Would he have gotten the perspective? Is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think maybe he didn't have the right perspective for a movie like this. I think a lot of people missed this movie just because I think we are much better at identifying Ali Fox types, much better now than we were in 1986, because we understand white supremacy. We understand like QAnon. We understand this person so much better. The type of guy who is probably too smart for his own good. I mean, this is what the billionaire class is. This is kind of what Silicon Valley is a group of white dudes that are way too smart for their own good. Yeah, and that's kind of why I give it a 7.5, because it feels a little unfinished towards the end, or the resolution or something. It felt like the Ali Fox character didn't learn anything by the end, and usually that's kind of the journey. But then again, he's the antagonist. So if you take it from that perspective, Sometimes the antagonist or the villain doesn't really learn anything, and they just kind of die from their mistakes, and then in this case, this is kind of what happens. So I think that we covered all the strengths, weaknesses. What, Helen Mirren? Very
Yeah,
underdeveloped.
Helen Mirren is wasted. I really like the idea that this is a more literary piece of work as opposed to being cinematic. That doesn't mean there aren't cinematic moments, but this very much feels character driven than plot driven, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, again, Witness from a structural standpoint is pretty much perfect. I don't think the structure of this movie is necessary as clear, which I think is both a good thing and a bad thing. I think it gives the movie a lesser feel, but I think that's needed. And again, I think River Phoenix is tremendous. So yeah, those are the strengths. And again, I think the look of the jungle is great. I think it looks tremendous. It looks dangerous. It looks both vast but also confining at the same time. And yeah, I think that's all really good stuff. Weaknesses, I mean, we don't really get to embrace kind of the cultures, which is unfortunate. But again, with this being a 2-hour movie, that's tough. But I think you have to acknowledge that. I wish they embraced the novel even more. And yeah, Helen Mirren is really wasted in this movie, and that sucks. I'm a little bit higher on this. I would probably give this like an 8 out of 10. But I certainly agree with you that the ending of this movie is problematic from the standpoint of it's not clear and it's not well executed. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Anything else before we get to our 2 awards?
I think we pretty much covered it. Like I said, I would clearly put Harrison Ford as the nominee, even winning over, what was it, The Color of Money. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I guess next week's discussion will continue because it seems like the best supporting actor category for next week's episode is the most interesting one to talk about. So we'll talk about that.
Now, what about River Phoenix? I mean, if you were to argue the best performance, and I'm going to get to the MVP in a minute, but is the best performance Harrison Ford or River Phoenix?
See, here's the thing. I haven't seen Platoon because Vietnam movies really make me depressed, and they took 2 of the nominations in that category.
Platoon is really good. Who were the nominees for Platoon?
Tom Berenger and Willem Dafoe.
I would say those are both well deserved.
And then you got Dennis Hopper for Hoosiers, but I think that one is I don't know. That Hoosiers is okay to me, but
yeah,
maybe you take River Phoenix over Dennis Hopper in that case.
Yeah, I mean Dennis Hopper is just playing a drunk, and I feel like that also feels like a Gold Watch nomination. I would say.
Yeah, and then Michael Caine won for Hannah and Sisters, and Michael Caine is somewhat of in a class of his own, so I don't want to touch on that.
I haven't seen the movie, so if I haven't seen the movie, I'm not necessarily gonna
I've
speak
seen
on
the YouTube clips a while ago, like years ago, just because I was kind of curious because of like Michael Caine in this kind of movie. I'm not going to mention the director, but yeah, he stood out because he delivered those lines really well. So I gotta give him credit for that one. So, and then if you take someone out, it's probably Dennis Hopper. So.
Yeah, that's probably the case. My MVP, I'm going to give it to Paul Schrader. I'm giving it to the screenwriters every single week in June and July because of and in honor of the writer's strike. And Paul Schrader, another very notable screenwriter. He has kind of had a late run here of pretty great movies. Yeah, the great Paul Schrader, a legendary screenwriter and director at this point. He is my MVP.
I'm gonna go with Peter Weir because the scale of that explosion, that takes some balls. Like as a director, that takes a lot of balls in the middle of a jungle. I don't know if they actually filmed it in the middle of the jungle. I don't know if they did it on a closed set, something like that, some kind of controlled area. But that explosion alone, I was like the MVP. There you go. As a director, that's something you remember all your career. So I'm always going to remember that explosion for sure because of the scale of it and it wasn't just red flame, people. It had blue flame. When you have blue flame, that's a level higher than a temperature much, much higher than normal flames in a fire. So when you got that going on, that's some high intensity shit and that's real flames. So I got to give credit to that. Best performance, Harrison Ford for sure. Yeah. So I'm just tremendously impressed with like the visuals. And the other thing too, I kind of wanted to mention as well, is like there's a lack of soundtrack, which I found actually it added to the movie. Like that's one of the things I forgot to mention in the strengths is like there is a soundtrack, but it's not really as memorable, and it feels like the words kind of speak for themselves, and like the natural ambiance and nature, or of the nature and the jungle and the sound of the jungle. That's kind of like the natural soundtrack to the movie, which I was kind of digging. So I was digging that vibe that there was like not really a soundtrack, but there was parts of a soundtrack, but it wasn't as memorable. But I think it helped the movie
For sure. Next week, we are going to be discussing Presumed Innocent. This is a movie that I went on a run of Alan Pakula movies, and as a matter of fact, there's a documentary that just came out about Alan Pakula that I need to watch. And I remember watching this movie, and the ending of the movie kind of floored me and left me with my mouth agape. And I'm really excited that we're going to be talking about it next week. And all I'm going to say is make sure you watch this movie so you can see the ending, because we're going to probably talk about the ending pretty early on. And that's what we're going to be talking about next week. We're also going to be talking about a fantastic supporting cast and another John Williams earworm, if you can believe it. So for Brian, I'm Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
So Harrison Ford could have easily played, Mr. Freeze, right?